Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra daf Kuf Mem Hey. It's quite a long daf, but I do want to get started with a very quick summary of what we're up to before we get started, so you don't get lost in the back and forth. But I will warn you, it's a long daf, but with a lot of interesting things where we'll learn a whole bunch of interesting things. Among them, really the customs of what was customary in those days around weddings, which is just interesting. So we started with a Mishnah that if there was shushbinut, which again are these reciprocal gifts, that let's say I would send my child to your son's wedding, and then I would give gifts, but I would also send my son to enjoy. He would have fun at the party. He would kind of be the life of the party and the sameach, be happy with you and your family, and also send gifts. And then you would in turn be responsible to both send your son, when my son got married, to give gifts, and also to enjoy my wedding. We'll talk about later, what if they don't come back to the wedding? Do they still have to give the gifts? What if they're not part of the simcha of the wedding? Because those two things are somewhat, they go together, but we'll see what happens then. Then we discussed a case where the person who was returning the gift, then the father had sent the child, the son, and then the father was no longer alive. So does it go specifically to the son? Does it get divided by the brothers? We saw a braita that said one, the Mishna that said the other. In the end, we said, well, really, it goes to that son. But the Mishna that said it gets divided must be talking about a case. Well, we had three answers. The last answer, I'm just going to go back to the last one. The last one was that we're talking about a yabam. That was, I believe it was Shmuel. He said, the Mishna is talking about a yabam, where the one who was supposed to get married and get the gift died. Now the brother inherits. So the brother, and then the brother, in other words, we're going to have to see, did he already get married, or was it before he got married, or maybe before he finished the 7 days of the Sheva Bracha, which we'll see were really an integral part of the wedding celebration. Nowadays, some people do Sheva Bracha, some people don't, some people do some. There it was really part of the wedding party, included the 7 days. We'll see that later. And the idea being that what happened was the brother, the yabam, who's now supposed to marry the woman, the wife, who died, the husband died without children because they were either not even married or just married, right? They were at least betrothed, maybe also married. But the gifts basically don't go directly to the yabam because they get divided up by the brothers, because the yabam only inherits the brother for things that the brother owned at the time of his death. He doesn't inherit things any more than his other brothers that are supposed to come to the person after their death. And this is going to come to him after his death, because we assume right now he didn't yet get married. So the Gemara says, but wait, this means it does get divided up among the brothers, meaning the other side does have to pay. But why should they have to pay? They could say, but we didn't get to be at the party. The guy died. It's not our fault. And this is why I said the two go together. If we bring the gifts, if we were able to be misameach and come to the party and celebrate. But there was no party, there was no celebration. And if there is none, then one can make a claim like that. How do we know one can make a claim like that? Because we see a similar thing, which is going to get us off on a total tangent, about a wedding, a betrothal. If a woman gets betrothed by a man, and then the man dies, what do we learn? That if he dies, Yecholai shetomar, and here's the beginning of our daf, Tnuli ba'ali ve'esmachimo. She doesn't have to return the kesef kiddushin. So a woman gets betrothed, she gets money. Then the wedding never goes through. So depending on why the wedding doesn't go through will affect whether she has to return the money or not. Now, if he died and because of that the wedding didn't go through, she could say, look, it's not my fault. Bring me my husband. I wish my husband were here. I'd be happy to be misamechim. I'd be happy to have a wedding with him, be married, and therefore I'm not returning the kesef kiddushin that I got, because remember, he betrothed her with money or with something that's worth money, like a ring. And she doesn't have to return that because she says it's not my fault. So likewise here, it should be the same thing. Hachanami nema tnuli shushbinim esmachimo. The other family could say, look, the guy's not there for us to be happy with him, for us to celebrate with him. We don't have to pay. We only have to pay. If the guy were here, he's not here. I don't have to pay. So, but again, it was implied that they did have to pay. It was just a matter that the yabam doesn't get it all. He has to share it with his brothers, but the other side definitely had to pay. So why would that be? Amar Rav Yosef hacha b'ma'askina kigon shesamachi Moshe b'yimei mishteh v'levaspik leporo ad shemet. Well, the case was the guy did come to the wedding, and the guy made it through his wedding. In other words, the son of the second family who gave the gifts first, right now, they had the wedding. And that's why you see, he had all 7 yamei mishteh. If he were to die before the Sheva yamei mishteh, he actually wouldn't be obligated. But he made it through all the 7 days, and then the guy died. Okay, again, if you try to get into the minds of what's going, the real life of these people, right? Very sad. Makes it through his wedding and then dies. Either which way, it's a sad situation. And then, but what happened? The friend came to the wedding, the other son, he was supposed to be, was happy with him, did all that, but he didn't bring the gift with him. He was going to give it to him later. And then he didn't give the gift and the person died. Now he's obligated because he was part of the wedding celebration. He's obligated to give the gift, but since it was ra'oya, not muhzak, it wasn't in the hands of the person before he died, therefore the yabam has to split it evenly with his brothers, and that was the third way to resolve the contradiction between the Mishna and the braita. But now that we mentioned this issue of tnuli ba'ali ve'esmachimo, this claim that a woman can make, the Gemara is going to now suggest, and it starts with the word lema, which every time we come across that word, I remind you, lema means we're going to suggest but reject this suggestion. Let us suggest, there's this machloket that's very unclear what they're talking about, what the machloket is. They're going to suggest first, as the first way to understand this very unclear braita, that the machloket between the two opinions, which is going to be Rabbi Natan and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, is on exactly this issue. Is that a legitimate claim? Can the woman claim, Tnuli ba'ali ve'esmachimo, bring me my husband, which they can't obviously, and I'll be happy with him, meaning I don't have to return the kiddushin money? Or do we say, no, she can't claim that. In the end, she got the kiddushin money in order to get married. The marriage never happened because the man died. It doesn't matter why the marriage didn't happen. She has to return the money. Okay? And again, we'll see, even if you say she has to return the money, that's going to be dependent, but that's like a side thing, on what the minhag hamakom is. Okay? Not in every place was there accustomed to return the money. But if you think that theoretically she might have to return the money, that will only happen if that's the custom in the place. Okay? You have to first establish that it's a possibility. If it's a possibility, then it will depend on the custom in the land. If it's not a possibility, then you won't have to do it, even if that's the cut, right? Even if there is some custom like that, you don't have to do it. So let's read inside. So we're now going to suggest that if he dies, she, according to one opinion, will claim, I don't have to return the money. Produce me my husband. I'll be, it's not my fault. I'd be happy to marry him. And the other opinion is going to say, no, she has to return the money. So Ditanya, isha, somebody betroths a woman and then never ends up, right, getting married, because now we're going to get into ketubah. When do you pay a ketubah? If the husband divorces the wife or the husband died. So one of the two happened, because now we're going to talk about a ketubah. Either he died, not that she died here. Either he died or he divorced her. Bitula govematayim almana baden. Now, even if they didn't have a ketubah, we've learned this many times, he anyway has to pay the ketubah money when he divorces her, or if he dies, even though they were only betrothed, he still has to pay the ketubah money. If she was a virgin, she gets 200. If she was a widow, who's already married, then, right, any kind of already married, widow is just a term for any woman who was already married, she gets 100. Now, then it continues and says, Makom shenagu lachzir kiddushin machzirin, makom shenagu shelo lachzir kiddushin em machzirin. As we said before, it depends on the minhag makom. We don't know the situation yet, and we don't know how this connects with the ketubah. We don't really understand this so well yet. But this opinion says, right, and that she'll get a ketubah, but she'll have to return the kesef kiddushin. We don't know if that's the same case, a different case. We don't really know yet. If she lives in a place where that's customary, because again, this was a case where there was a betrothal, but there wasn't a marriage. So if she's in a place where they're supposed to return, she returns. If not, not. Divrei Rabbi Natan. That's Rabbi Natan's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi Omer, be'emet amru. We don't know what these words add, but they really say, right, which often is, this is how we hold. Makom shnagu lachzir machzirin, makom shnagu shelo lachzir em machzirin. That's the exact same words that Rabbi Natan just said. So he just didn't relate to the first part about the ketubah, which we assume he's got to agree with that. I mean, if there was death or divorce, of course the husband has to pay the ketubah. And then he just repeats the same words that Rabbi Natan said. If it's a place where they generally return, they return. If it's not, not. So this braita is totally unclear what this means. To which the Gemara asks, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Hainu Tanakama. They seem to say the exact same thing. El alav, it must be there's much more here than what you see. Remember, that's why we brought this. Maybe the debate between them is, can she claim this or not? Now, you're going to have to add a lot of words here, which is why the Gemara says the classic, what do we do when we have to add words to a braita that makes no sense? There's words missing here, and this is how it should read. If someone betroths a woman, okay, that's what we know already. In what case are we talking about? And this goes back to what I said before. Right? right? If he changed his mind and decided not to marry her and divorces her. Aval meta, right? And that could be also, by the way, if he died, although we're going to get to the case where he died. Aval meta, if she dies, in other words, there's two different cases. One is he dies or he divorces her. The second is, what if she dies? If she dies, then the question is, do her heirs need to return this? And this is exactly what we said the opinion was before, right? At the bottom of Kuf Mem Dalet Amud Bet, Rav Yosef bar Abba said in the name of Mar Ukva, in the name of Shmuel, Lo Shanu Ela Shemeta Hi, right? If she dies, it all depends on this Makom Shnagu Lachzir or not Lachzir. She dies, do we take it from the heirs? Well, that all depends on your custom. Do they have to return the money? But, right, V'davka shemeta hi. That's only though if she dies. Aval metu ein machzirin. What is Rabbi Natan basically saying according to this? Exactly what we said before, which is if she dies, it all depends on the minhag hamako. If he dies and leaves this widow behind, nobody thinks that she has to return the money. My time, now, it doesn't say this in the braita, but in any case, the braita isn't clear. We have to add things, so that's what we're going to assume they're talking about. Now, what does Rabbi Yehuda Nasi come to say? Rabbi Yehuda Nasi be'emet amru. When he says be'emet amru, what's he saying? Rabbi Natan tried to say, what I'm saying is only in some cases. Only if he dies and leaves her behind. I'm sorry, only if she dies, then makom shnagu lachzir machzirin, makom shnagu shelo lachzir em machzirin. But bein mate he comes Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and says no. Any situation where the wedding doesn't go through, makom shnagu lachzir machzirin, makom shnagu shelo lachzir machzirin em machzirin. In any case, she might have to return the money. If she's in a place where that's the custom, she returns the money even if he dies and leaves her by herself. She still has to return the money. Why is that? Because lo matya that's not a legitimate claim. In the end, she didn't get married, so she returns it. Doesn't matter what the reason is. The fact is, the marriage never went through. The kiddushin was given for the purposes of the marriage, so she returns it. There was no marriage. Doesn't matter if it wasn't her fault. Okay, and that's the way they explain this machloket right now. In a minute, we're going to reject it. They're suggesting, again, we don't really know, but what we're assuming he means by be'emet amru, across the board, every situation, not just a case where she dies, right? Even if he dies. I want you to think about, again, if you try to understand this from an emotional perspective or a financial perspective, when the woman is left alone, right? The woman was meant to be cared for. And if he dies, well, she's still meant to be cared for, and she shouldn't have to necessarily return the kesef kiddushin. Again, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi thinks she does anyway. But the other opinion makes a lot of sense. Besides, she could claim it's not my fault. It's also she's left as a widow now. We want to take care of this woman to make sure she's taken care of. If she dies, well, first of all, we're assuming, right, she doesn't have children because she just got married, or she didn't even get married. She just got betrothed, assuming she wasn't married before. But basically, the kesef kiddushin will go to her heirs. They don't need the money. I mean, maybe they do if they're poor. But what I mean is, it's not a situation of, oh, the poor family has nothing, no way to live. It's the father who's going to inherit her stuff. So that there's not as much of a need to say he should keep the kesef kiddushin. Whereas when she's a widow, and this is just a different reason I'm suggesting from seeing the situation from her perspective. Right when she's dead, it's not that important to leave her with the money. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says no. Even then, even if she's left alone, the kesef kiddushin, right? She maybe that's not a legitimate claim. Give me my husband, okay? Maybe that's not. But the Gemara rejects this and says that's not what the machloket's about. Lo, dekule alma yichola shetumar tnu li bali v'esmachimo. Udemitu kule alma lo pligi. Okay, nobody disagrees in the case where he dies. If he dies in between the kiddushin and the marriage, the betrothal and the marriage, she does not have to give the money back. Okay, she's left a widow from this marriage. Again, not a marriage, a betrothal, but betrothal there was already part, on the way to marriage, and a halachic thing. It wasn't just like our engagements nowadays. She gets to keep her kesef kiddushin, and by the way, she'll get her ketubah also. That everyone's in agreement about. Well, then what's Rabbi Yehuda Nasi talking about? Ki pligi shemei tahi. The machloket is if she dies. And the machloket is based on something else, because once she dies, right, the machloket is not we have to come up with a reason for the machloket. The whole thing of Tnuli Bali Besmachimo is not relevant. So what's the machloket about? Okay, tibuin comes from the root litboa. Litboa is to drown, okay, or to sink. So what they mean here is kiddushin meant to sink? Is the kiddushin money meant to stay forever in the family of the woman, whether or not they get married or not? It's like a gift that's given. Okay, this comes up nowadays, right? Unfortunately, it happens anytime. But if, let's say, a couple gets engaged and they have an engagement party and people bring gifts, and then they break off the engagement, are they supposed to return the gifts? Right? It's like a big question. What do? Do you start returning all the gifts that everyone gave you? It's complicated. So that's kind of what we're saying here. Again, it's different because this isn't gifts they receive from other people. This is the betrothal money. Now, it's very different, but I was just bringing it as a way to kind of think about it. But here, when he gave her the kesef kiddushin, was he giving it to her as a gift that's going to stay with her no matter what? Or was he giving it to her as a gift that is dependent on whether or not they get married? This is a one of two, right? This is I'm giving this to you, assuming that the next stage will happen. And if the next stage doesn't happen, if we say kiddushim lav l'tibuim nitnu, they're not given to be sunken. They're given for the purposes of the marriage. If the marriage never happens, if the marriage doesn't happen, then it should go back, right? Maybe an engagement ring would be a better example, right? Does that go back? So they say the following. That's the machloket. Now we have to read this into the braita because it's not so clear. And then, by the way, I just want to make it clear. We'll see this inside. But if you say it's lav l'tibuin yitnu, it wasn't meant to be given forever. It's still going to depend on makom shenagu or not makom shenagu. Then we get into the realm of, well, depends on where you live. In other words, even if you say theoretically, he might not be giving it forever, but then it depends what happens in your town. If people, okay, let's put it in your terms, Erica. If people return engagement rings, then they returned it. If people don't return engagement rings in your town, then they don't return it, right? Like that kind of thing. So, okay, but again, I just want to be clear. The engagement ring comparison is not a real comparison here because what we're talking about is the wedding ring. Because we do kiddushin under the chuppah. They did kiddushin earlier. So it's the wedding ring and not the engagement ring that we're discussing here. So nowadays this wouldn't happen because we don't have kiddushin before the wedding. It all happens at the same time, right? In a span of 5 minutes. They read the ketub in between to separate the two. But that's basically so, okay, let's just make that clear. So now we have to understand the machloket. So, kipligi shemetahi, vacha kiddushin l'tibuim nitnu. So let's read it. Rabbi Natan Sabar, kiddushin lav l'tibuim nitnu. He says they weren't given to be meant forever. And that's why he says, again, first he starts off with the woman gets her ketubah money. If the man dies, the woman gets her ketubah money. If she dies, that's the second part. If she dies, well, was the kesef given to her family, kiddushin l'tibuim, to be there forever? No. And therefore, it depends on minhag hamako. If she dies, then does he need to return the money? Do the family, the heirs, need to return the money or not? Well, that depends on the custom of your land. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi Sabal, kiddushin l'tibuim nitnu. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says they're meant to be given forever. You never need to return them. Okay, now this really doesn't fit with what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, though. We have a big problem. Remember what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said? He just repeated what Rabbi Natan said. And he said, be'emet amru, makom shnagu lachzir machzirim, makom shnagu shelo lachzir machzirim. We just said, he said, you don't have to return it. So the Gemara says, how could you possibly say you never need to return the money because it was given as a gift that's supposed to remain in the family forever, even if they don't go ahead and get married? He does say you return it. So the way they explain this is, and it's again a very weird way to understand it, but either which way, this braita doesn't make sense. You have to reread it. Hachikama. He switched topics. What basically, without saying the important part, what he really means is we don't return ever the kiddushin money. But be'emet amru, but there is something you do return, and what is that? Sivlonot. There was also kiddushin money that was given, and that was the betrothal. That was either a ring or money. But then there were gifts that were customary for the husband's family or the husband to bring to his new family, okay, to the wife, to the bride's family. Those gifts go back, and that's more like engagement gifts, but engagement gifts of the family to the family, that is nahug to give back, okay? Only if it's, again, if it's customary to return it, we return it. If we live in a place where it's not customary, we don't return it. We don't see, wasn't even talking about that. And the machloket between them is kiddushin l'tibuin or lav l'tibuin nitnu. Now the Gemara says, well, okay, we're getting off topic. We started with Tnuli Bali Vesmachimo, and that was all because of the yabam, right? When the guy's dead, you could say, oh, give me my right. I don't have to give the gift because the guy who I'm owing the gift to is dead. But and then we explained that he actually went to the wedding and it was a different story. From there, we got to suggesting that maybe Tnuli Bali Vesmachimo is a machloket tanaim. In the end, we said no, the machloket tanaim is not that. It has to do with kiddushin l'tibuim nitnu alav l'tibuim nitnu, and it's not the case where the man dies, it's the case where the woman dies. And the question is, do her heirs need to return the money or not? Now we're going to see that Hane Tanai Kahane Tanai. And here it's not introduced with a lema, it's introduced as a statement. And therefore, we're not going to reject this. These Tanaim, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and Rabbi Natan, the way we just explained it, and it's a way of kind of supporting our reading of this machloket, is the exact same machloket Tanaim that we're going to see between Rabbi Yehuda, which is not the same Rabbi Yehuda, it's Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eli, not Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Yosef. It's going to be a three-way machloket here. One's going to say it's l'tibuin, one is going to say it's lav l'tibuin, and one's going to say we're not sure. It's a suffix. Now, it's also not going to be clear, and we're going to read this braita and not understand it at the beginning, and the Gemara is going to have to explain it. Usually we read braita and they're very easy to understand. Here today we have braita that are super complicated and unclear. Ditanya. Kidshabi kikar. If he betrothed her with a huge amount of money, this is 25 maneh. Maneh is 100 zuz, so 2,500 zuzim. Kidshabi maneh, bitula gover matayim va'almana maneh. Okay, so he betrothed her with a huge amount of money, and then we don't know exactly what happened. We'll have to figure out. Somebody, for some reason, the wedding didn't go through. So obviously, we're going to have to, if the betula is getting matayim and the almana is maneh, it's obviously from his side. Either he died or he divorced her. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda, where betula gover matayim almana maneh, umachzeret lo et hash'al. Rabbi Yehuda says she gets 200 or 100, depending whether she was a virgin or not, and has to return, though, all the rest of the kikar. In other words, she basically takes this 2,500 maneh, deducts 100 or 200, keeps that for herself, returns the rest. Okay, you can already see here, kiddushin l'tibuin or lav l'tibuin, because according to the first opinion, Rabbi Meir, she doesn't have to return anything of the kiddushin. She keeps it. According to the second, she returns it. Now, Rabbi Yossi Omer, kidsha be'esrim noten la 30 chatzaim, kidsha be'shloshim noten la 20 chatzaim. Okay, I'm not even going to try to explain him yet, but he's doing a clear play here, and in the end, we're going to have to say the case is a widow, and the commentary said, why do you break a case of a widow and not a regular case? Or a second marriage, you could call it, instead of calling a virgin and a widow. It's probably nicer to just say first marriage, second marriage of this woman. So what we mean here is he did a play here. Sometimes it will be the betrothal was 20 and she'll get 30, or the betrothal is 30 and she'll get 20. Now, the 20 and the 30 are 30 halves. Okay, she'll get 20 and she'll have to give back 30 halves, which is really 15. Okay, but because he wanted it to be this literary parallel, 20 to 30, 30 to 20, then he goes, and sometimes she'll get 30 and have to give back 20 halves. Okay, we don't understand what this means. No worries, we're going to get there. B'mayaskinan. Okay, now we have to go through what's this case, because there's a bunch of things that don't really make sense. Now, Ilema Shemeta. Okay, now I said before it has to be he dies, because if it wasn't that he died, she wouldn't be getting her ketubah, right? If she died, of course, there's no ketubah. So option one is going to be Shemeta. Well, then be la ketubah. There's no ketubah money. She doesn't get ketubah money if she dies. The ketubah is only he dies or he divorces her. Definitely not that case. Ela Shemetu. Well, if he dies, it also doesn't make sense, because the first line makes sense that he dies. He's giving her the ketubah. But what did we just say? If he dies, what did we learn? She doesn't have to return the kesef kiddushin. That was the whole thing. She could say Tnuli Bali Vesmachimo, and the whole returning kesef kiddushin isn't even in that case. So Ela Shemetu Amay Machzeret Lo Tasha'al V'Neima Tnuli Bali Vesmachimo. Can't be that case either. Well, now we're stuck. He died or she died. It can't be either. So now we're going to suggest it's talking about a totally different case. It's not about not a totally different in the sense there is a problem. The marriage never went through. But not because he died, she died, he divorced, she divorced. It's not any one of those possibilities. It's something else. What could be a reason why they can't go ahead and get married? Even, right, they're betrothed and then can't get married. Well, Ela Be'esha Yisrael, we're going to have option 3, which we're also going to reject, and then we'll get a fourth, and we'll explain. Be'esha Yisrael Shazinta. If she was an Eshet Yisrael. She was married. Okay, she wasn't married yet, but she was betrothed to a Yisrael. And she goes and sleeps with another man. Now, and that's why the wedding doesn't go through in the end. Well, b'mai, what's the case? Iberatzon, if she did it willingly, mi'i la ketubah, she doesn't get her ketubah money. If you are married to someone or betrothed to someone and then sleep with somebody else, you lose your ketubah money. That was a breach of contract. Ketubah is a contract. She was totally disloyal. So it can't be that, because again, we have to find a case where she gets her ketubah money. Ela ba'ones mishra shariala. Now, if she was raped, let's say it wasn't her fault that she, wasn't a willing relationship, well, then there's no issue. He doesn't have to divorce her. He could stay married to her if she was raped. There's no such thing. When is there such a thing? That's going to lead us to number 4. And that's always the hard case to discuss, which is Be'esha Kohen Shenan Saf. She was betrothed to a Kohen and then got raped. Then she's not allowed to be married to him. And then it's nobody's fault, really. So that's why we're going to end up with this case. Because then what happens? He has to pay her the ketubah money because it wasn't her fault. She was raped. On the other hand, she might have to return the kesef kiddushin because it also wasn't his fault. So that's the debate between the first two opinions. B'kiddushin l'tibuim nitnu kamiflage. Rabbi Meir savar kiddushin l'tibuim nitnu. The kiddushin were given even if the wedding never went through. And here the wedding didn't go through because she got raped and now can't marry the kohen. So the kesef kiddushin were given and they stay, and that's why he pays her the ketubah money and done deal. That's it. She keeps the kiddushin. Rabbi Yehuda savar alav the tibuim nitnu. Rabbi Yehuda says no, they weren't given. They were given for the purposes of the marriage. Marriage never happened. She has to give them back. So she takes from that money the ketubah money and gives back the rest. Now we have to understand this complicated Rabbi Yosef opinion. So the first thing to understand is that Rabbi Yosef is going to assume it's a saf. Rabbi Yosef misapkale ila tibuim nitnu ilo. Okay, basically he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know which opinion is right. So what do? Well, mamon mutal b'safek, according to Sumchus, Holkim, we split it 50-50. Some of the commentaries think he's holding like Sumchus. Some people say, why don't we say Amotzim Mechaver Alav Haraya? Well, some people say either he holds like Sumchus, or they say sometimes even the rabbis agree that we split 50-50. And this would be one of those cases. Again, it's debatable. But here we go. We're going to split 50-50. Okay, now we have to get the numbers. If the numbers are too complicated, don't worry. The real issue is here, just to make it as simple as possible. Basically, we take whatever money came in for the kiddushin, we split it 50-50. He gets half back, she gets to keep half. Now, if she keeps half, he has to basically compensate with whatever's left that he owes her from the ketubah. Okay? In other words, she'll keep, so you'll see in a second how it works. So because he's not sure, hilcha, kidsha be'esrim noten la shloshim chatzaim. So the numbers here are confusing because they're not the numbers we're looking for. 20 is 20 shekels. Shekels, according to the Torah, is 4 zuzim. So 20 shekels is 80 zuzim. If the kiddushin was 80, then what happens? She keeps 40 and she gives back 40, right? Now, he in the end, right, noten la shloshim chatzaim. He has to give her 15. Why 15? 15 is times 4 is 60, okay? So she keeps 40 of the kiddushin and gets another 60 to get her up to the maneh. Okay, that's how we got to the esrim noten la shloshim chatzaim. Kidsha b'shloshim, if the kiddushin was shloshim, then shloshim is 120. Okay, we're safek about the 60. So he gets 60, right? He gets 60, she keeps 60. And then noten la esrim chatzaim, she gets 20 halves, which is 10. 10 shkalim is 40. And then that gets her up to the maneh of 100. Okay, so she keeps that, and then he has to add the more to complete the maneh of what she's supposed to get. So that's all because he's misupak, and that's how we got to that creative sifruti thing. Okay, moving on. I'm Rav Yosef. Now, what we had until now is we have a machloket about kiddushin l'tibuim nitnu alav l'tibuim nitnu, and that's relevant in a case. Okay, it's not relevant in the case where he dies. If he dies, she definitely doesn't need to return the kesef kiddushin. If she dies or initiates the divorce or whatever it might be, right? If it's her doing, then, or in this case where it was nobody's doing, then we have this machloket, l'tibuim nitnu or la l'tibuim nitnu, does she need to return the money or not, right? If she were to die, let's say, or if this situation were to have happened, right? We saw the machloket in both cases. Now, the question is, how do we rule and how did the Amoraim rule? Because these are Tanaitic debates. Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Yomi, Amar Rav Nachman, Bechol makom shnagu lachzir machzirin. Betirguma nehardea. He says, in a place where nahagu lachzir, we do return the money. Again, that would be in a case where he died. Where she died. Then the heirs would need to return the money. Okay? And what place is that? They explained it's in Nehardea. That's where they have a custom to return, and they would return. So the rule, like we said before, which is she can claim in that case, right? In the case where he died, she can claim, I don't have to return anything. But in the case where she died, her heirs might have to return it if they lived in a place with like Nehardea. Shar Bavel Mai, what's the custom in other places in Bavel? Rabbi Rav Yosef to Amri Travayu, Mohare Hadre Kidushe Lo Hadre. Well, Rabbi Rav Yosef tell us that the mohar goes back, which are the sivlonot, it's the gifts. The gifts do get returned, but not the kiddushin money. Even if she dies, the heirs don't have to return it in the other places in Babylonia. Amarav Papa, Hilchatai says, I'm going to tell you what the halacha is. Bein shemetu, bein shemetahi, v'hadar behu. Okay, there's three possibilities. He died, she died, or he changed his mind and decided not to go through with the wedding and divorced her. More hadre, kiddushe lo hadre. In all those three cases, she doesn't need to return the money, but she does need to return the gifts. Hadra ba'ihi, but if she decides, she initiates divorce. Now, in the end, he has to divorce her, but she doesn't, she's unwilling to get married, and he divorces her on account of that. Afilu kiddushe nami hadre. He says in that case, okay, that one case, she does have to return the kiddushin. It's not like she died, right? There, makom shenagu and in Bavel, they weren't no hagi, but they were no hag to return it if she initiated a divorce. Ameimar Amar, Kiddushe lo hadre. He says, wait, you can't ever return kesef kiddushin. Why? This is something we haven't discussed until now. There's a problem if you do that. Gzera shema yomru kiddushin tofsim ba'achotan. Now, I assume he means in a place where it's not customary to return it. And you're saying, but in this one case where she initiates divorce, we're going to return the money. People are going to see that. And what are they going to think? Since it's not customary to do it, and it's rare that the woman will initiate a divorce, so people will see she returned the money. They'll think that kiddushin was a mistake, like a mekach ta'ut, like he thought something and it was wrong or something. And then it was as if there was never kiddushin, or there was a condition that never was met. And they'll see her returning the money. They'll say, oh, there was never kiddushin. And what if he then betroths her sister? Now that's a rayot. He can't do that. And kiddushin ain't tofsim. It wouldn't be a kiddushin. But they'll think that the first kiddushin never happened, and they'll think that he can marry her sister. And if he does, they'll think it's effective, and it's not effective. And then that has all sorts of ramifications, and it's a rayot and all that. So because of that, he doesn't want us to return the kesef kiddushin. To which Rav Ashi says, what are you worried about? Rav Ashi Amar, Gita mochiach aleh, she'll have a get. Everyone will know they were actually legit kiddushin. The betrothal was effective because you need a get from a betrothal. So everyone will know that. Gemara says, Had Rav Ashi beduti. They dismiss what Rav Ashi says is a mistake. Because the Ika Shama Baha Velo Shama Baha. Some people might hear that she gave away the kesef kiddushin, but they might not hear about the get. And they might come to make this mistake with her sister. Interesting that they're concerned for that event. You know, what are the chances are that he's going to, after she breaks off the engagement, he's going to go and betroth her sister? Seems a little bit strange, but anyway, a concern. Now we're going to talk. That was the very complicated part of today's stuff. The rest is a little easier, but there are a lot of interesting things. Hopefully, we'll get through them all. Shushbinim nigveit bebeitin. Now we're going to go to this shushbinut, and we're going to learn a bunch of 5 halachot about shushbinut. First, they're going to list them all, and then they're going to explain them a little better. So Tanu Rabbanan, braita. Chamisha dvarim ne'emru b'shushbinut. There's 5 things they say about them. 1, nigbeit bebeitin. Okay, the court can enforce it. If you didn't pay it, they can enforce. Chozeret ba'onata. It goes back when it's due, meaning the court can enforce it, but only when the second, right, the one who gave the gift, when his son gets married. If his son doesn't get married, you can't enforce it. You can't ask for the gift back unless the son gets married. If the son never gets married, you can't ask for the gift. Ein ba mishum ribit. What if you return more money? What if you give a bigger gift? Is that ribit? Is that interest? No. Even though this is looked at as an obligation, almost like a loan, it's not really a loan and there's no interest, but there's no problem of interest, which we'll talk about soon why that is. Another way, it's not like a loan. The Shemitah usually cancels loans. If, one son got married before the Shemitah year and then the other son gets married after the Shemitah year, you still have to pay it. Shemitah year doesn't knock it off, the obligation. If a father gave not through one particular son, but gave to the family, right, gave as a family, and then it's brought back to the family, really to the father, but the father's dead already, then it gets split evenly among all the sons, and it's not given, the double portion is not given to the Bechor. Okay, in case I didn't say it, we're at the top of Amud Bet now. So now we're going to start explaining all the cases. Nigbeit bebeitim, my time, kamil v'dami. Can be collected in court because it's like a loan. Okay, but we're going to see, like we said, it's not exactly like a loan, but it is similar to a loan. You give money to someone, and then they're supposed to pay you back later. Ve'ein ba mishum ribit. Okay, they skip the one about the onata, either because it's obvious, or some people actually have the gear so where it does explain the onata, and that's because it's like a loan, and it's like saying, right, when you have a loan, the loan is due on a certain date. This is due on a certain date. It's an unknown date. It's a date that will happen in the future when the son gets married, of the second, the one who gave the gift. When his son gets married, that's when it will be due. Ein ba mishum ribit. Why is there no ribit? Okay, we're going to refresh our memory from some things from Bava Mitzia today. You didn't give it in the beginning with the intent to get more money back. Ribit is when I loan you money and you commit to give me more money back. Here, I gave you a gift through my son for your son's wedding, and you didn't say, I'm going to give you more. Right? We didn't arrange that from the beginning, and therefore it's not a problem. Lo yigos is where it says you shouldn't collect a loan because the Shemitah year comes. Now, this loan wasn't meant for collection yet. It's only meant for collection when the son actually gets married. So and that didn't happen before the Shemitah year. So it's just not part of the laws of Shemitah. Ve'en habachor notel pishnayim, tahaveli rai, ve'en habachor notel b'roi k'b'muchzak. Okay, what's the issue with rai? Well, remember, a pishnayim is only in land in possessions that the father owns at the time of death. This was an obligation that was coming to the father, but it wasn't paid to the father yet because the son wasn't married. So the bechor wouldn't get pishnayim because that's what we call ra'oi, not muchzak. I'm a Rav Kahana. Now we get to, I think, very interesting issues. If I sent my son, for gifts now again, this is where we see the combination between enjoying the wedding and paying the gifts. Okay, you go to the wedding, you're happy, you're mesamech the chatan, and then you get that in return, where they come to your wedding and they're happy with you. What if they don't come to the wedding? Are they not obligated? So the question is also, why didn't they come to the wedding? Did you not invite them? Okay, so now we're going to get into some interesting things. These are rules about shushbinim. If you were in the city, you have to come. The assumption is if you're in the city, you knew my child was getting married, even if I didn't issue you a personal invitation, right? This is classic, right? Your friend's having a kiddush, or a celebration, and you didn't get a specific invite, but kind of like everybody knew it was happening. Do you show up? Do you not show up? You didn't get your personal invitation. So, that is, you were in the city. The assumption is you knew about it. And if you didn't come, means you had to come. And if you didn't come, well, that's your fault for not coming. You, anyway, have to bring the gifts. Shama kal tavla. What if you weren't in the city, but they had this way of announcing it? They would blow a musical instrument, something. They would make some noise, and everyone would know, oh, there's a wedding, and I guess the word would travel whose it was. Then ibayle lemeta. You should have come. If you didn't come, tough luck. You anyway have to pay. Lo shama kal tavla. What if you were far away and you didn't hear and you didn't know, and they didn't send you a personal invitation? Ibayle lo duye. They should have told you, and they didn't. Okay, the family should have said there's a wedding. Here's fascinating. This reminds us of Bava Mitzia. Tar omet itle. You can have a legitimate reason to be upset with them for not inviting you. Okay, now this is classic. Right? How often do you get upset you weren't invited to something? Now, is it fair for you to be upset you weren't invited to something? In this case, they say, for sure it was fair of you to be upset. This is like the halacha telling you, you're not always allowed to be upset about things. There's certain things you can make issues over and certain things not. This, you can have a grievance against them. But shilumei mishalim, but you still have to pay. Even though you weren't invited to the wedding, you owe an obligation. When their son gets married, you have to pay whether or not you were invited. Now the big question comes for kama. But how much do you have to pay? Because what happened? Now, perhaps we're talking about all these cases. There's a machloket among the commentators. Perhaps we're just talking about the last case, if you weren't invited. Now, it makes sense to actually say it's all the cases, but perhaps this has to do with the grievance you have. But now the issue is this. You didn't come to the wedding in the end. So what does that mean? You were supposed to bring a gift of, let's say, $100. Now, you didn't eat anything at the wedding. So the assumption is, now, again, how they knew you weren't coming is a good question, but because they probably spent the money anyway, we don't know. But assuming you didn't eat anything, when you go to the wedding, so you eat, you spend the other person's money. So you didn't cause them to spend money on you. So perhaps you can deduct that. And that's why it's a question. Can you only deduct it if they didn't invite you? If they invited you, well, then maybe they spent the money on you anyway. But if they didn't invite you and they should have invited you, right? And they didn't, then maybe you don't have to pay, or perhaps you don't have to pay at all. And now the question is, well, how do we calculate what you would have paid? And this is going to be fascinating to you, I think. To me, it was. Because, nowadays you go to a wedding, everybody gets the same portion, okay? It seems like you got a portion depending on how much money you were expected to pay. And that all depends on how much money you gave for your gift, in the beginning for the other person's gift. Amrabai, Nagu b'nei ganana ad zuzef, the people generally paid a zuz, up to a zuz, and basically that's what you gave for their son. Then you don't have to pay anything because the zuz would have just covered your food. And then, right, we talked about this in yesterday's class that in Israel, it's very common that you pay for your share. That's what you give as a gift is what you were going to spend, what you were going to eat. So it's like saying, if you don't go to a wedding, you don't have to give a gift because you didn't eat anything and your gift would have covered the cost of what you ate and you didn't eat, so you don't have to pay. Ad arba'ah mishalim palga. If the gift was 4 and then they were supposed to pay you 4 zuzim, well, generally, if you were giving a gift of that caliber, they would feed you 2 zuzim worth of food. And therefore, they would give you more food. At least that's the way some interpret it. Some interpret it, you'd have to bring someone to help you bring all the money, and then that would be an extra guest, and you would have the 2 zuzim's worth of food. And then again, you can deduct 2 zuzim because that's what they would have spent on your food, and they didn't, so you don't have to give that. Mikam elach, if it was more though than 4 zuzim, then inish kechashivute. The amount that they might spend on you really depends on your standing in society. If you give a very big gift, they might give you like extra special desserts, extra special meats, extra. Fascinating to think that they would do this. Anyway, so therefore you would have to calculate it based on who you were and make an assessment, and then that would be the amount you could deduct. Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, now we get to another really interesting line. One got married in a big public celebration, and the other was going to get married in a very small ceremony. Now, why someone would do this? The commentaries bring different explanations. So the Rashbam says, perhaps she'et sarahi, which is very fascinating, right? Especially nowadays, some people are doing much smaller weddings because we're in the middle of a war. Certainly in the beginning of a war, the war, it was very common. And perhaps it was an eight sarah, it was a time of trouble, and because of that, this person was doing a smaller wedding, or rotzelet some same sudato, or he just maybe couldn't afford to do a big wedding. Okay, the Rabbeinu Gershom brings other reasons. He says maybe because he's shul lamed, maybe I'm not sure what that means. Maybe like he learns and he didn't want to waste his time with a big wedding celebration. Or he says another interesting thing, or mipnei emat b'nei adam. He's scared of people. Right? People don't like to be the center of attention, so he just wants a smaller wedding. Really interesting to see the different approaches, how they explain this. I'm sure there's a lot more. Those are the two I looked at. Yachol Marlo, fascinating comment here. The other side can say, who owes the gift, well, if you did a public wedding and I had, now, why is this? It's a little bit strange. Well, in a public wedding, there's the assumption, I wouldn't say this is necessarily true, especially those who did these weddings in the beginning of the war, especially that were small weddings, but the simcha is less. I don't know if that's true, but I didn't, it wasn't as much of a celebration, so I don't have to give you a gift. Like, it's not the same. It has to be, this is reciprocal. It has to be really reciprocal. And we're going to see a whole bunch of examples of this. The first one was marrying a woman, a first wedding. The second one then was marrying a widow. So, or a woman who was already married. It's not the same kind of wedding again. And yes, Corona weddings also was something I was thinking of. So you could say, no, you did a wedding with me. It was a first marriage. I'll come. No, he says, it's fascinating. He says, right. He says, you did it with a betula, right? If you were marrying a virgin, a woman who was not married, I would have done it, but now I don't have to. And these are things you can really get out of your obligation in this way. What if the first person's wedding was the second wedding? This is a funny statement. And then the other one was getting married. It was his first wedding. When you go to your second wife, I'll come to hers because then it'll be like mine. Okay, which is kind of funny, like assuming there's going to be a second one. I mean, those days, at least you could do that without the wife dying or a divorce, but still, it's a little bit odd. One got married to one woman and the other was getting married to two women. Now, could be he was marrying two women at the same time, which is very weird. Some people think that what he means is, I want to split it. Like, I'm planning to marry this woman now, and maybe I'll marry another woman down the road. So give me half now and come to both weddings and give me half now and half later. Now, I'm going to go to one wedding, just like you went to my one, and I'm going to give you one gift. Okay, because they mentioned this pumbi, now they get into a total tangent. Tanu Rabbanan, then we're going to explain atir nechasin, atir pumbi. Okay, if someone has a lot of property or they have wealth that everybody knows about, like they have a lot of animals, that's one of the examples they bring because everyone can see how many animals you have. It's something very noticeable, and that's why they brought this up because it's talking about pumbi, noticeable things. Zehu bal hagadol. This is someone who knows how to darshan because they would darshan in public and everyone would hear them and it would be like, wow, this is a good speaker. Atir salin, atir tkoa, zeu bal pilpul. These are people who make a lot of money on every transaction, like a money changer, makes quick money on every transaction. There's a lot of benefit, immediate benefit. So that's like someone who's pilpul. Every time he thinks about something, comes up with a new thing, a new thought, you're always benefiting. Okay, atir tkoa, there's different people. Some people think you own houses and rent them out, and you're also always making money on it. Atir mishach, atir kamas, different explanations, but these are people who store things. Okay, so Zeu Bal Shmuot, this is someone who remembers all the traditions. They have a lot in their storage. But here's the big push for Daf Yomi and why women should be learning. Hakol tzrichin l'marich, but everybody needs the one who have a lot of grains because the grains, they turn them into flour. And that's the people, that's Gemara. That's, some people have it Talmud, that Censura changed it to Talmud. I don't know why the difference, but the point is, these are the people who understand how to understand the Mishna, how to apply that, right? That's how you understand everything, right? The flour is everything. It's the basis. This is the basis for everything. I'm a Rabbi Zera, but we're going to have a bit of a different approach. I'm a Rabbi Zera, I'm a Rav. My diktiv kol yimei oni ra'im. Okay, there's a pasuk in Mishlei that says, all the days of a poor person are bad, and tov lev, someone who's good-hearted, mishtet tamid, will always be feasting. And it sounds like, although we'll see one interpretation that thinks the opposite, that it's bad to be poor, right? It's good to be tov lev, like you'll always be in a mishted. That's a good thing. So kol yimei oni ra'im ze bal Talmud. This is someone who learns Talmud. Okay, here's the opposite. This is not good to learn Gemara. It's really hard. You're going to suffer all your days because you're always going to be struggling. B'tov lev mishtet tamid ze bal Mishna. Mishnayot are simple. They're easy to understand. You have a nice life. It's easier to learn. Rav Amar Ipcha. Rav says, what are you talking about? It's the exact opposite. And this is what they said in the name of Rava. Those who take stones, right, and they quarry from the quarry and they do something with them. But those who cut trees will actually warm themselves with it. In other words, stones you don't really benefit from. Whereas if you cut trees, you'll turn them into heat and you'll actually get warm from them. In other words, you're doing something, but you're not really understanding the whole picture. You're not gaining so much from it. That's the real hana'ah. Elu ba'alei Talmud. These are the people who learn the Talmud. They really understand the reasoning and all that. That's the pure enjoyment. So he understands it, thankfully, the opposite way, for us anyway, who learn Talmud. Rabbi Chanina Omer, kol yemei oni. Okay, now we're going to have totally different way of understanding that pasuk, a bunch of different drashot that get to things that are good for people, things that are bad for people. Rabbi Chanina Amar, kol yemei oni ra'im, ani ra'im, this is someone who marries the wrong, like a bad woman. In other words, your life will be rough if you marry a tough woman. And we've talked about this Isha Ra'a, Isha Tova, and all that. So I'm not going to expand on that now. But Tov Lev Mishtet Tamid, that's someone who has a good wife. Rabbi Yana Omer, Kol Yimei Oni Ra'im Ze Istinis. This is someone who gets bothered by small little things. Tov Lev Mishtet Tamid Ze Shedat Toyafeh. This is someone who takes things easygoing way. He'll have a better life. Rabbi Yochanan switches, though, the meaning. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Kol Yimei Oni Ra'im Ze Rachman. And this, I'm going to end with this one. And this one really, I think, we weren't thinking of our times about the small weddings, but here we really have something powerful, which is Kol Yimei Oni Ra'im Ze Rachman. This is someone who cries a lot. They're sad for people who are suffering, and they understand the suffering in the world, and they have hard days because they're so sensitive. Tov Lev Mishtet Tamid Ze Achzari. But Tov Lev Mishtet Tamid is someone who lives life just being happy and not being aware of all the suffering around them. And that's a bad thing. So he flips the meaning of the pasuk to think The ra'im is actually tovim, and the mishteh is actually bad. So he says, that you're supposed to go around life being sensitive. Obviously, we have to keep it in balance and be able to live our lives without being drowned by being too sensitive, but also living life being sensitive to those around you who are suffering. And that's really the idea. Okay, I'm not going to have time to summarize the daf. You can read the summary on the website and the podcast details. And with that, we'll finish for today with that thought in mind. Wishing everyone a good day and a Shavua Tov and B'sorot Tovot.